You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Mish Shedlock, editor of Mish's Global Economic Trend Analysis. Welcome to the show, Mr. Future President.
It's a pleasure to be on the show. Any candidate running for political office is happy with any publicity.
Is there anybody who isn't running for the Republicans?
Well, my dead grandmother, my dead mother. Other than that, I believe everyone is running. And so I decided to throw my hat into the ring today. Actually, the impetus for my poke, it's sort of a joke, but the questions I answered were very serious ones. And this whole post came where I announced my candidacy for president. It came about because Gallup did a series of 11 questions the U.S. public wanted to ask candidates. And there weren't any gotcha questions. They just wanted to know, how do you propose to fix the economy, and how do you deal with record low confidence in Congress, and what do you do about race relations, and what about immigration reform? Just what do you do about jobs? And I took each of these 11 questions and gave what I thought was the correct answer. And let's just take the first one on the economy. They wanted to know what I would do to fix the economy. And I said the economy is in a mess precisely because we have government bureaucrats and the Fed attempting to fix it. So my proposal was to get rid of all this regulation, because every time it makes it worse. And if you look, the example I gave in my blog was everywhere Congress meddles has been a disaster. Look at, healthcare costs, education, and housing. How many affordable housing programs did we have? And to what end? None of these programs ever worked, and the bigger the segment, the more the government interfered with an economic segment, typically the higher the price, the higher costs, and the more inefficiencies there's been. So, that's how I answered that question. And so I got a lot of positive feedback, and in fact, I didn't get any negative feedback from my answers. So I'm happy about that.
I guess nobody in government replied.
I was not invited to the presidential debate this evening. Damn.
Well, would you be running as an independent, a Republican?
This was my GOP platform. This is the platform I believe the GOP needs to have, or anyone needs to have. The problem is we've got a two-party system, so I could have equally have put this proposal out there and said I'm going to run as a Democrat. To me, party labels don't matter, Jim. And if you look at the things I proposed, they really, really cross party lines. For instance, I said we need to cut back military spending, but I also said we need to cut back entitlement spending. So here we are. The Democrats would be unhappy with one, and the Democrats and the Republicans would be unhappy with another. So I made a lot of enemies here, with both sides, and it's because they both have policies that are extremely destructive.
Too political and not practical.
Yeah, well, I'm too practical to win, and that's just actually, I believe someone could actually win the election on the platform that I put out there. The problem is they couldn't get nominated in the first place. So the Republicans are not going to nominate anyone who is, quote, soft on, defense, which is really offense. They want more warmongering everywhere. And certainly the Democrats aren't going to nominate someone who takes on public unions, like I did in several of my answers to these questions. So here we are. We're left with the worst of both worlds. We had warmongering on one end and untenable pension promises on the other. And the way compromise works in Congress is both sides get what they want. So we have warmongering and out of control entitlement spending. That's compromise in Washington.
Bombs and feather bedding.
What was that?
I said bombs and feather bedding.
Yes, exactly.
Can the Chinese government stop the Shanghai market from collapsing?
They tried. I don't believe they can. Short of buying up all of the shares and becoming, the buyer of only resort. And if you look, I think still have huge numbers of stocks that are halted on the exchange. So what are they going to do? The problem is shares should never have got so ridiculously high in the first place. And, it was caused by China attempting to manipulate the market to make growth targets in line with what they thought they should be. Well, money goes somewhere, and in China it goes to extremely volatile bubbles. And so, first we had housing, and now everyone's, turned their focus on speculating in the stock market. It'll, if they keep their loosey-goosey money, the next bubble somewhere else is going to be bigger. This is what, happens in less defined markets, say, than we have here in the United States. The bubbles and the volatility around them just, get bigger, than what we're normally used to dealing with here, although we certainly saw a pretty huge crash from starting in November of 2007 or so for over a year. So the same things can happen here. They just tend to happen more frequently there.
And of course, the Chinese people do what the government tells them to do. So they were told, buy stocks; they're perfectly safe.
Pretty much. You had all these wealth and management products. The government came out and guaranteed these things. You get these government guarantees, you get a lot of speculation. In China, they really like to speculate on these things. The average speculator was the high school age. I mean, that's something you don't see here in the United States. You don't see a lot of kids going out on margin buying shares of stock that have not graduated from high school. So you have a completely different set of mental thinking or lack thereof in China, say, than you do here in the United States.
And I also believe, too, a significant percentage of the companies on the Chinese stock exchange don't really exist. They're just fronts. I saw a documentary where people drove up to a factory, they were given a tour, and then 2 hours later there was a different name on the factory and another tour came through.
Well, not surprising at all. The same thing with these state-owned enterprises. Jim Chanos, a short seller of Chinese stocks, has reported the same kinds of thing. These companies have, literally no earnings at all, but they make it appear as if they do. Same thing happened here in the United States with the dot-com bubble in 2000. They would, sell someone allegedly, some of their own equipment, report these huge, jumps in sales. Who were they selling the equipment to? They were selling the equipment to their own subsidiaries, and the equipment just sat there unused in empty offices. So, that's what went on here, and you have the same sort of shell games going on in China to a greater extent.
We'll have more with Mish Shedlock right after this.
More and more people are looking to the internet for intelligent, riveting, and thought-provoking interviews. To advertise on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com, call 604-699-8600, 604-699-8600.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Mish Shedlock. Going back to the situation in Greece, which never seems to end, and we've been talking about this since 2012. I took a look at our notes.
I think before that, but yes, it never ends.
Can small Greek businesses survive the currency controls they have right now?
They're struggling, and a lot of them are going to go out of business, and that's what's really sad. Here you've got a situation where a lot of government businesses aren't viable at all, and here you've got a situation where you've got these, small, but private enterprises that are actually viable, that they've managed to make a profit, even in spite of the, collapsing Greek economy over the last couple of years. And here it is, because of capital controls, they don't have enough money to import their goods. Now, what the smart companies did was they didn't maintain a bank account in Greece, but elsewhere. So, they can avoid, the capital controls that way. So they're the ones that can import the goods, at the expense of everyone else, because they sheltered their money. They protected it from these capital controls. So, and we've got Greek bank shares plunging. These Greek bank shares are almost worthless. And the weird thing is, in 2012, they recapitalized. They set up $50 billion to recapitalize these banks. And what do? They went out and bought shares of them. That is $50 billion now that Greek taxpayers, have to pay back, that was squandered on Greek bank shares that are now worthless. The list goes on and on and on. I totaled it all up, and actually my total ignored all kinds of things that really need to be in it. But I just looked at the first two bailouts and the third bailout, and I said, well, okay, if we assume that Greece runs a current account surplus of 3% for the next 50 years, and interest rates are zero, and they don't have to pay back Target 2, and we can ignore all of these other imbalances here, all the other debt, and we just look specifically at the bailout debt as if that's all that has to be paid back, it would take 50 years for Greece to pay this stuff back. And they're not going to achieve a current account surplus of 3% a year. Interest rates aren't going to be zero. They're going to be some positive number. So, if you say 2% or 1%, at 1%, it takes something like 150 years for Greece to pay back this debt. And even at that, they're not going to have a current account surplus of 1% for the next 150 years. So no matter how you slice and dice this thing, there's going to be another restructuring of this, and we've just done another round of extend and pretend here, Jim.
Time to turn off the lights. The party's over.
Well, it looks like the party's going to go on for a while. It's going to take another. Greece is in a bind until it has a current account or capital account or primary account surplus. It has enough money coming in where it can meet all of its debt payments. Meet all of its payments, all of its import needs, all of its bill paying. Support the state segment. Except for interest on debt and debt repayment. If Greece gets into that situation, it will once again be in a position to default on all of this stuff, and of course the number will be higher. And I think that's what's behind, Schäuble's demand that Greece pledge $50 billion worth of assets, because I think Schäuble recognizes that risk.
An interesting project in Amsterdam, a bridge made by 3D printing?
It's amazing what they call 3D printing now. Essentially, this is something that appears like it just like you put in a diagram and it welds in place using materials of some kind that it can work with. I'm not sure how this thing got the name of printing, but all kinds of things are called 3D printing, and they're not really printers per se, but in a technical sense, rather they lay down layer upon layer of material. So China is actually 3D printed houses, or the shells of houses, and you can 3D print, typically with plastic, all sorts of manufactured products, typically prototypes, but anything that can be produced out of plastic can certainly be 3D printed. I don't think that 3D printing is very effective on a large scale. However, 3D printing is very effective for prototypes, and it's very effective for some kinds of things. I don't know whether bridges would be one of them, but certain parts or custom-made parts, where you just have to, do a diagram and you have a small need for a limited number of parts. 3D printing is a beautiful, beautiful thing. And even for something like, homes, where the thing, can just, lay out these materials and build the walls and the holes for the windows, laying down this, goo that, hardens into a concrete-like form. Yeah, there's going to be lots of uses for it, and it's just amazing the progress that we see in these areas, Jim. It's actually very fascinating that video laying out this bridge with 3D printing. It looked more like self-welding than 3D printing, but regardless of what one calls that, the whole process was completely automated. Didn't need any people to work on it. Yes, robots will be doing the eventual design. They're getting, certainly smarter and smarter, and some people fear artificial intelligence. All of this stuff is placing cost pressures on stuff. All of this technology is inherently deflationary. Doing, more stuff, with more people. Same thing with automated cars. We won't need taxi drivers. We won't need bus drivers. We won't need train drivers. We won't need truck drivers. The trucks can literally drive themselves. All of that is price deflationary, but enter the Fed, enter the central banks in general, and say, no, we need prices to go up. That's where a lot of the problem is going to come, trying to force up prices in an inherently deflationary technological, environment. It just doesn't work. It promotes businesses to get rid of people even faster than they would otherwise. And, an entire debate over the word productivity is now in place amongst economists on account of this. I'm going to write a post on productivity shortly, attempting to tackle this issue. I don't believe it can be measured because we're measuring it in false ways. We measure productivity by an increase in GDP, but the increase in GDP is itself arbitrary and inflated because of all the monetary printing that's going on. So I think productivity is hard to measure in that sense, but no doubt we have it because you can see it with all the products, and with all these new products, the quality of life goes up, and that's also another measure of productivity, and it's another measure of progress, and it's progress, oddly, that the central banks are trying to fight.
And finally, to wrap up the show, a quote from Monty Python: "No one expects the Spanish Inquisition." Referring, of course, to the new law in Spain where you can be heavily fined for saying anything that might be interpreted as being critical of a police officer. A warning for tourists.
We've seen some very, very disturbing things with what people can say and do to say to policemen. You have to show official respect to the police. Someone used the word mate, which would be like Australia. Hey, matey, you don't want to give me a ticket, or pal, I really didn't do anything wrong. Just calling a police officer mate, pal, or buddy, or any other term that the guy doesn't like, even if it's not meant to be in a derogatory manner. And my reader Brand from Spain pointed out, that the actual Spanish term used, which roughly, some of these words don't translate very well, which roughly translates to buddy, pal, or mate, but is not meant in a generally derogatory context. Someone in Europe got fined 600 euros for using that word, And I said that these kinds of actions, they're going to, it's like putting a pot on a lid on a simmering pot, and putting it on there, tight. At some point, it's going to explode over, and you just can't repress people from doing and saying normal kinds of things. Fine them for everything. It's not going to work, Jim. These things are going to boil over at some place. Greece is going to boil over. Spain's going to boil over. I think we've got situations in Afghanistan that are going to boil over. And unfortunately, a lot of these things are likely to boil over all at once.
Well, in Spain now, it's illegal to film an arrest. Can you imagine if we try to do that in Canada and the U.S., where we're finding out the cops aren't the perfect beings they claim to be?
Oh, no, and people, and there's videos of people who have had their phones and cameras smashed by the police for taping them. So somewhere our rights are being trounced upon, and that was another thing they did, in Spain, was said, well, you can't even tape these things. So, here in the United States, the police act as if there's no laws here that say, well, actually, in some states, I believe there are laws, but those laws are illegal, and I don't think they would be upheld in the Supreme Court. But again, all of these things, all of these repression matters, we've got financial repression, we've got police repression, all for the benefit, of the state. It's a pot that's going to boil over, Jim.
Well, Mike, thank you very much for chatting with us.
Pleasure to be on the show.
My guest has been Mish Shedlock, editor of Mish's Global Economic Trend Analysis. You're listening to HowStreet.com radio. Find us on Twitter at Talk Digital Net. Our popular YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Comments about the show can be sent to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.